This is Dawna Lee Heising with MoreHorror, and I'm here with the famous international filmmaker Mark Savage.
Nice to be here, Donna.
Okay, now let's start from the beginning. You were born in Australia.
Yes.
Okay, well, tell us about your family.
My family, my father was a printer. He initially wanted to be a photographer, but he didn't pursue that because he discovered that when he was working with the chemicals, processing photographs, the chemicals actually gave him a terrible reaction on his hands and on his skin. So he had to actually drop that, and I think, to some extent, he always regretted that because that's really what he wanted to do. He wanted to do photography, and he did take a lot of photos. I used to find old cameras around the house when I was young, and I'd often ask my mum, whose cameras are these? And because my dad never spoke about it. But then when I was a little older, my dad told me that, we used to put have the chemical baths that I'd use to process the black and white photos, but there was something in the chemicals that made his hands break out. So that was why he then sort of chose something that was kind of sort of graphically oriented. So he became a printer, an apprentice printer, and then he worked his way up, worked for a company, and then eventually he bought his own company, and then he employed a number of, I think about 50 to 100 people, and that's what he did for the rest of his working life until he then became a nurseryman when he retired. Mm-hmm. And my mum was always, she was a stay-at-home mum. She was pretty much always there to welcome us when we came home from school, or discipline us, or or have have a drink and some cereal ready for us. But yeah, she pretty much did that. Very, very devoted.
Mm-hmm. And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I have one brother who's 2 years younger than me. I have another sister who's 4 years younger than me, and a younger sister who's 10 years younger than me.
Oh, okay. And your brother is an actor?
My brother is an actor. I guess in a sense you'd say he's more like a part-time actor. He actually also has a job. He works at a film school in the technical department. He's very technical and very fastidious about his equipment and his edit suites and the cameras. And so he's a perfect person for that job. And he also has been in a number of films because he and I started making Super 8 films when we were really quite young. I was 15, he was 13, so of course he played the bad guy or the monster in every Super 8 film, and then we'd bring in some other friends for other parts. But we pretty much made, between us, about, say, 100, 120 Super 8 films between the ages of about, say, for me, about 15 and 19.
Well, how did you guys get into it? I mean, how did you decide to do that?
It was really just... I always enjoyed writing, and it got to a point where I was being exposed to a lot of movies, and I think this is what happens. You get exposed to a lot of movies, and you start saying to yourself, well, this is something I think I would like to do. So from a very young age, I wanted to be a writer. I wrote horror stories even when I was at really young, like grade 1 and grade 2 at school. And then I eventually got to a point where, I was being exposed to horror films, also a lot of science fiction films, that type of thing, and really sort of older movies like... the early favourites for me were like Valley of the Gwangi, which was a sort of Ray Harryhausen dinosaur on the loose movie. Also films like, It, The Terror from Beyond Space, Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires. But then also James Bond films. My dad took me to a lot of James Bond films, and it was probably the only time that my dad and I really sort of gelled on various issues, was his love of James Bond films, and he was also able to, he always would say to me after the James Bond films, what did you think of the leading lady in that? She was quite beautiful, wasn't she? So in a way, so he also, I guess, enhanced my awareness of the opposite sex.
Okay. Now, in high school, you and your brother continued to make these films?
I made them at high school age, but I certainly didn't do it at school. The school I went to, which was like a private boys' school, obviously, this is quite a while ago, they didn't have any sort of film or media department, but it was more a thing on the weekend that I worked in McDonald's from a very early age. I actually initially lied about my age to get a job at McDonald's, a part-time job. With the McDonald's job, the money from that, I then bought a Super 8 camera. Mm-hmm. And so... once I bought the Super 8 camera, that's really how I learned filmmaking. I didn't have anyone else to show me. I didn't know anybody else at the time, who was making movies. It's not like now where nearly everybody's making movies. This was Super 8, and this was at a time when the type of movies that people were making on Super 8 predominantly were simply like things like travelogues. It was mostly like, say, the only people I'd met were often older guys who had a family, and whenever they went on a trip to like Niagara Falls or Disneyland, or in Australia to Queensland, they would take Super 8, footage of it. But back then, it was like $8 for a roll of like film that was like 2.5 minutes with sound, or 3 minutes 20 seconds with that was silent. So it was much more expensive.
Oh, so you're a natural writer then, because you started so young. And then it sounds like you're a natural filmmaker too, and you experimented a lot. How did you learn how to edit?
Pretty much the same. The first films that I made, I actually edited in camera. So when I was shooting them, it's kind of sort of hard to explain exactly what I did, but I would literally, someone would walk into shot. When they were almost halfway out of shot, I'd let the trigger go, stop the shot. Then when I'd pick them up in another shot and just try to pick the point that was right. It was weird. I mean, it obviously didn't always work, because at that time I didn't even have like a splicer. So the first 5 to 10 movies I made were all completely edited in camera, even the fight scenes. So it was just clicking off like a frame. Well, not a frame. It was impossible to just click off a frame, but it was more like clicking off like a second or 2 seconds. So it was an interesting way to do it. But then eventually I started becoming disenchanted with the fact that, it's running too long, or didn't quite like the way that I cut it in camera. So then I got a little splicer, and then I was splicing films, and then I had my little projector to watch it back. So, but it was like the progression, and that's really pretty much how it started.
I read an article last night that said, where you said that you're fanatical about having, in the action scenes, about having the things meet, or like having the blade really go in and all of that. So it must have been hard in camera.
Yeah, well, probably, yeah. I mean, obviously not the real blade going in, but it was really being, from a very early age, I was very fanatical about basically, someone punches someone, it really looks like they got punched. Or rather, you place the camera in the right position so it looks right, because I'd seen a lot of lower budget movies, and often I just kind of go, that punch like missed by like a mile, so to me, the difference between, between low budget and big budget, it is often the professional attention to detail, but that's not necessarily something that costs money. Like often people will say, oh, well, it's a low budget movie, but my attitude is, no, there's no excuse in a low budget movie to, for example, be staging violence, but it looks unconvincing, especially things like fight scenes, because the fight scene, it doesn't take money to place it in the right spot. It takes simply a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of wisdom to know where you place the camera, and if it looks like someone is not really punching someone, then you move the angle. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty fastidious, so I guess I'm very anal about that type of thing.
Okay, and then I also read that the two important things are having a good script and having good actors. And when did you learn that?
Actually, it took a while for me to learn that. I certainly didn't know that at the beginning, because, at the beginning I had my brother in my movies, and my brother was, he was a good actor, but in the sense it really wasn't his chosen profession. But it was often the friends that we got in who weren't so good. But back in those days, you grab anyone who's available. It's like you just call someone up and say, because we pretty much made a movie almost every weekend for about 5 years. So that's really all we did for that entire period. So we just grabbed friends. But it was actually after making my first movie, a film called Marauders, that, I looked at it and thought, okay, yeah, some of the actors are good. Because again, I was grabbing people who were sort of semi-experienced but not entirely experienced. And the film itself is let down by some of the performances. And it's really my fault, not so much the actor's fault, because I shouldn't have selected some of those people for the movie, because when you're a director, it is your responsibility to cast it well. Because if you don't cast it well and you don't get the right performances, it's all very well to sort of complain about, oh, well, this person wasn't very good. Well, in that case, the question then becomes, well, why are you hiring them if they're not very good? Back in those days, of course, it was a fairly pragmatic reason, which was they were cheap and they were available. And on the first movie, they were able to do 40 weekends in a row for almost no pay. Yeah, that was the first film I did was 40 weekends in a row, so basically 80 days of shooting. It was a very ambitious project, but at the same time, it was compromised by the fact that some of the performances are not good. So it was a fantastic lesson.
Okay. Now, so what happened during the distribution? I know it got distributed in some countries in Europe, but a pirated copy?
Yeah, Marauders was actually picked up by a sales agent, but most of what they did with it was sort of hard to say exactly what it was, but it got pirated. They sold it to some countries, but then of course we never saw any evidence that it was really sold, or never saw any evidence in the sense of, well, here's a check for where it's been sold. But then I would see it turning up in various places, and it was just like a lesson that distribution is really, really tough, and also it's very, very difficult to find distributors who are honest with the filmmakers, and that's still the case. There are good distributors out there, but also I'm sorry to say, but like probably a large majority of distributors are not basically honest with the filmmakers. They have really high expenses, and they'll, for example, they'll travel the world, selling the movie and staying in big hotels and having, eating very well. But a lot of time the expenses are all put back on the filmmakers. So it's very hard to often make money back, which is terrible, especially if you have investors, because you want to be straight up with investors. You want to do your best job possible to get the money back for the investors. But obviously, if you've also got the distributors sometime, who are not really working as partners with you, it makes it really difficult. And that's really what happened with Marauders. And it's happened with a number of movies of mine. But you still soldier on. You still keep going.
Yeah, well, that was what Ron ran into in this deal that I was telling you about. So having someone want to travel the world and have the filmmaker pay for it.
Yeah, it's the key, of course, is to finding a good distributor. But finding a good distributor is just so difficult because the agendas are often different. Often they're in it to simply just make as much money as possible in the short term from each new filmmaker. So even if they don't get that filmmaker again, they don't really care, because I'll find another one who's kind of naive and stupid who will then put their next film with them. Mm-hmm. Whereas ultimately you want to really form a partnership with the distributor that's an ongoing partnership. This is what you really want to do with everybody you're working with. You want to have an ongoing relationship with people, which is, in a way, you end up then being able to make movies for... In a much tighter way. They're also, in a way, becoming cheaper to make, because everything is kind of trusted. It becomes more like a circle of trust. But it's very difficult to get to that point. So, there's no actual solution to say, oh no, well, this is what you do and this is how you do it right, because it depends who you work with. Because also sometimes even the people you work with, their financial situations can change. So then the way you're dealing with them also starts changing. If someone's losing money, then their relationship with you could also change, because they're suddenly having to do things that before they may not have done, but they're now doing it because they're becoming more desperate. It's a very difficult industry in that way.
Well, you're known for your creative violent scenes and your creative sex scenes. So did dubbing the porn movies and, dubbing at night, did that help your education in that?
Dubbing the movies means that you're watching the movies a lot. I had a lot of movies, and these were mostly exploitation films. So European and American exploitation films, and American X-rated movies. I would say more than anything, it just gave me a greater knowledge of movies. I've always had a huge interest in movies, and I constantly read, and I have read books about movies from a very early age, like going way back to early books, like there's a Dennis book by a guy called Dennis Gifford called Horror Movies, which a lot of horror fans always speak about as that's one of their first exposures to horror. Mm-hmm. And that was one of mine, because I would simply just see the book when I was really young, and I would just marvel at the photos. And I was particularly drawn to anything that was particularly grotesque, anything especially that was about freaks and strange looking people. And I've always felt very sort of, in a way, myself marginalised, because at an early age myself I wore an eye patch. So, when I wore an eye patch, I wore the eye patch from about the age of 4.5 up to about the age of, say, 11. And so I was always like this kind of weird looking kid, and other kids would call me One Eye and Cyclops and things like that. But which, of course, when you're young, has it's more kind of slightly more hurtful. Of course, when you're older, it's kind of amusing. But I think in a way my sensibility was that I kind of got drawn to the strange, the bizarre, and the weird at a very early age, because I always felt myself that I was a bit like that. But when
you did tell me. You're so good looking, and you're tall and blonde and everything. You told me you felt like a monster. I didn't really understand it, but I guess if you did wear the eye patch, then kids would perceive you as different.
When you're a kid, I think the first thing is for most children that you kind of want to fit in with other kids. That's the first thing. But to me, I think you sometimes go in two directions. Then that when you are different, I felt very different, like not only kind of mentally, but also appearance-wise. I think what happens, you either become like a little bit twisted and insular and very introverted and easily hurt, or you sort of like more embrace your difference. And I think that's kind of what I did. I embraced it. So from a very early age at school, I'd have like Dracula plays, and I'd usually be able to interest the girls in playing like Dracula's brides and stuff. And I remember when I was about 7 or 8 at school, my parents had just got a big oil heater. So I took the oil heater box, a big cardboard box, to school, made that the coffin, and I asked the principal whether I was allowed to go around and do a Dracula play. And I God knows what he must have actually thought of this, like 7-year-old went to a Dracula play. And then I started to recruit 5 or 6 girls who'd be like the brides of Dracula. But so I guess I also found at an early age that maybe it was a good way to meet girls, But at the same time, I mean, what I really liked is that I was kind of drawn to people at that age who were a bit marginalised. And when I think about it, the people who were in my early plays were all very marginalised kind of girls, So they're all girls who the other girls wouldn't talk to. So I guess everyone was drawn to something a little different. And I was, of course, Dracula.
Okay, so when did you come to the United States?
I came to the United States at, the first time I ever came here was in 81. So I came here because I'd met someone through a magazine called Starlog. And because when I was in Australia when I was 15 years old, I wanted to be in touch with Americans, because at that time Australians had very little contact with Americans, and all you knew of America was what you saw on television, because this was before the internet, of course. The internet changed everything. And I would read this magazine, and so I wrote a letter to the magazine praising the magazine itself, Starlog. And I also said, if anyone would ever like to write to me as a pen friend, I'd love to hear from people. Anyway, the magazine, I think, came out in something like January of 1981, and I got 500 letters over the next 2 months. Oh. And it hadn't even come out in Australia yet, because back in those days we got the magazine's C-mail, which meant that when we would read an issue, they'd be 3 months older than they were in the US. Oh, so okay. over those months, I was not only getting pen pal or potential pen pal letters from Americans, but from kind of all over the world. So at one point, I was actually writing to about 200 people. And I remember I'd come home from school and my mother...
Were they all female?
Well, no, actually, okay. They weren't all female. I mean, it was probably maybe, say, 70-30, okay? And so, because I guess to them it was like they're writing to Australian, I'm writing to American, and back then, there was just not much information, not much cultural exchange between the two countries. Mm-hmm. And I decided that I would write to, everyone who wrote back to me, everyone who initially wrote, I would write back to, and just say either oh yeah, look, thanks for the letter, but it doesn't seem like we've got much in common or whatever. I must admit, I probably mostly wrote back to people who would send photos and would list their favourite movies and stuff. Uh-huh. But anyway, eventually got to a point where I did meet a woman through Starlog, and she said to me, why don't you come over to the US? So I basically kept working at McDonald's, saving up my money. Then I went over to America for the first time. So that was my first exposure to America. And I remember on the first day when I arrived there, because she wanted to, she said, do you need to sleep? You look tired, etc., etc. I simply opened up the newspaper, which was the Detroit Free Press. It was in Detroit. And I saw that Scanners had just started that day, the new David Cronenberg movie. So instead of going to sleep, I said to her, oh no, I want to go and see Scanners. So the first thing I did, I'd literally just come off the plane, I went straight to see Scanners. And I sort of just embraced the whole, I liked America sort of straight away, and I like Detroit. Mm-hmm. I hear a lot of negative stories now about Detroit, and obviously, it's probably maybe changed a lot since I was there, but I really enjoyed my time in Detroit. Oh,
okay. Are you still in contact with the woman?
Yes, I still am in contact occasionally with her. We ended up marrying, and...
Oh, was this Susan, right?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
No,
so this was the first one.
This was the first one. Her name's now Alyssa, and she was actually a lot older than me. But every now and then, we still chat, and we find it really amusing that we had met all those years ago and we got married. The marriage didn't last for a long time. Mm-hmm. But she was a very nice person. I have nothing negative to say about her at all. It's just except that, we're obviously very different people. And she was more oriented towards, admittedly, science fiction than horror. Oh, okay. And I'm sure she found my interest in horror a little bit extreme, and especially when I would do things like, I remember there was a shocking blizzard one night, and all day there'd been a blizzard anyway, and the blizzard went into the night, and I said to her, oh, well, I'm going to head off now and go to the drive-in. She goes, you're going to the drive-in? She goes, it's a blizzard. She goes, you don't go to the drive-in in the blizzard. And I said, but they're surely still screening the movie. She goes, no, they're probably not even screening the movie. I said, no, I'm going to go and check. So I remember driving about 40 miles to see Last House on the Left and The House by the Lake, also known as Death Weekend. And I was the only person at the drive-in. But the drive-in was open, so I went through the gate and I sat there watching the movie, and they had a heater. They actually put a heater in the window, and they gave you the heater as you kind of drove in, and so you had a heater in the window heating up your car, and I also had the wipers going nearly through the whole movie, and because also the snow was piling up on the front of the hood of the car, and every now and then I'd literally have to get out of the car and just wipe all the snow off the window because the wipers weren't actually sweeping enough away. And then I remember when I came home from the movie, because I actually stayed for the movie, I watched Last House on the Left, which started at like 7 o'clock. Then I watched House by the Lake. Then I stayed again for Last House on the Left. So I didn't get home till like 1:30 in the morning. And I remember she was kind of angry at me, like, where were you? And I said, I was at the drive-in. She goes, it's been a blizzard. You couldn't have possibly been able to see the movie. I said, no, it was great. It was like, I was able to get out and sweep all the snow away. And I think at that point she kind of realised maybe I wasn't the guy for her.
That you were a little extreme. Everybody that knows Mark has told me, that I know, has told me that he has an encyclopedic knowledge of films. I mean, are there many films you haven't seen?
Look, I'm sure there are a lot of films I haven't seen, and I'd certainly like anybody to let me know, I'm always very eager to read other people's lists of films that they love, and so I'll always try to find obscure blogs, obscure sites. And I have a blog myself, which is great because I meet a lot of people who are into really obscure movies who often tell me stuff. But look, no, in no way would I say I've seen every movie, because there's movies from a lot of countries that don't get any release anywhere, like from India and Pakistan. But I mean, I've seen like certainly a gamut of movies throughout my life. I mean, I try to watch at least a movie every day. Usually I'll get up, I often watch the first one very early, like maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock. So often when I get up and have my breakfast, I'll watch a movie. It's one of the movies I've just brought in. I'm constantly bringing movies in from overseas all the time. In any country, I've got because I've got a machine that will play every Blu-ray, every DVD in the world from any region. So the whole point is I do try to do that, often. So at least say 350 to say maybe 500 films a year. Been doing that for a long time. But it's all types of movies. It's not just horror. I mean, I like everything from some of my favourite films are The Tin Drum, to a film called My Father's Glory, My Mother's Castle. Right through to Iranian films, but then right through the horror and action. I like a broad range of movies, and
Well, you like the broad range, but do you have a particular favorite then?
I don't think I these days have a movie that I would say is my absolute favourite, because there's just so many that are good. I don't think that. I think it's a good period for movies now. I mean, I think it's always a good period for movies if you're adventurous enough to look for them. A lot of people will say, "Oh, there's no good movies around anymore." They used to make movies like that. Well, almost all the movies that used to get made are still being made somewhere. So it's really just a case of being adventurous and actually trying to find them. I mean, I think with me, I guess the only thing I guess that's kind of changed in my taste is that I think I'm just a little bit more more critical, but at the same time I also understand with each movie I see just how damn hard it is just to make a movie. And whether the movies end up good and bad, I mean, of course no one makes a movie going into it thinking this is going to be a pile of crap. But the thing is, everyone approaches a movie, with best intentions. So so I'm always very sympathetic, even when I watch a movie that it doesn't completely work for me. I'm being a filmmaker, I can never kind of divorce myself from the empathy of with the filmmakers that they set out to make something great. It didn't turn out because I've done the same thing. My movies to me are I'm very critical of them, and I'm the most critical of my own movies. So that's why it's not like I'm never ever feeling that kind of like, oh well, yeah, well, like I've made it. I'm making the kind of movies that that are wonderful and the sort of movies that are great. No, every single movie you're learning new things all the time, and you're always trying to be better. And I think the more movies you make, the harder it is, because you don't want to repeat yourself, and also you also have that inner desire to improve, and if you don't improve, you're very disappointed with yourself.
Did you start Phantom of Pulp because you watched so many movies?
I started the blog Phantom of Pulp mainly because I was constantly being asked by people, what are some of your favourite movies or books? Because I'm also a huge reader, horror fiction and all kinds of books. And that was why, because I kind of figured, well, I'd rather be able to have this blog so people can go there and I'm really just sharing my passions. I mean, that's what I like doing. I mean, I actually just like, if I saw something and I loved it, I love to tell other people about it and say, you should look that. I also have no problems promoting other people's movies, like talking about other people's movies, because I know occasionally, even though there's some people will say to me, how come you talk about other people? Don't you kind of worry that, that's giving other people publicity? I'm thinking, what am I worried about? It's kind of like, I have my own movies, which are unique to me, and other people have their own stuff. And I'm very happy to kind of champion other people's stuff if I think it's really good. And I do that all the time on my blog.
Mm-hmm. And where can we find your blog?
Oh, well, it's the address, the URL is phantomofpulp.blogspot.com. Or just maybe Google Phantom of Pulp. I mean, it'll come up on that. Okay, I was living in Detroit, and one of the first jobs that I got while I was there was I worked for a company called Orion Pictures. I had a very good friend who worked for 20th Century Fox called Burt Livingston, who I'd become friends with there when I was very young. And he was one of the first people who ever became like a mentor to me, because when you're very young, especially when you're into kind of like bizarre things, you don't meet a lot of adults who kind of encourage that. They're always kind of like sort of looking at you like you're a bit of a weirdo, and sort of like eventually you'll grow up and you'll start to take things seriously, because I never see it as being serious, as being someone who's dedicated to the bizarre and the weird and horror and that type of thing. Anyway, I met Bert, and Bert, I just first phoned 20th Century Fox because I just saw they had a branch office in Detroit, and so I spoke to him. He was a branch manager, and he said, "Oh, well, come on in, we'll have a chat," and took me out to lunch. And he was impressed with my knowledge of movies. And he said to me, I really want to hire you. I'd love you to come and work here in distribution. But he said, I don't have any jobs at the moment. But he goes, but I do know that they're hiring at Orion at the moment. So there was a guy called Sam Oshry, who was running Orion, the branch office there. And he said, look, speak to Sam, tell him I recommend it. He goes, and I'll call Sam as well. So that's how I got the job at Orion. I was working basically in distribution, but sort of on the marketing side and also the booking side. It was a small office, so I was kind of like doing booking and marketing. So, sometimes people would come into town and I would sort of like do some of the arrangements for, making sure they were picked up and making sure that they were taken care of. And then I was also doing, overseeing the films into the theatres, in the sense that I even go and sometimes and count the heads who were at the movies. So we'd have a film being released, say Lone Wolf McQuade, which was one of our films, a Chuck Norris film. So we would, I'd go there on the first couple of nights, I'd go and actually count the people in the theatres, because back in those days, the distributors didn't necessarily trust the theatres to report accurately, rather than saying, there were 100 people at the movie last night, they say there was 25. So obviously they'd never come out and tell the distributors, tell the exhibitors, we don't trust you, but that was pretty much what it was, making sure that they were being above board. So I did that as well. So I worked at Orion for like about a year. And it was great. It was a really good introduction to film distribution, and I was kind of like seeing, how things were done, how prints were shipped, and also how the marketing kind of worked. The marketing worked with the shipping, and it was important to me to actually understand that aspect of filmmaking, because I think that when you have that understanding, then you can't be hoodwinked by exhibitors and distributors when you are further advanced in your career. If they're telling you, well, we can do this and do that, then it's good to have knowledge that you can also know whether someone's being legitimate or not, and that's really where it helped.
Okay, I want to ask about Ron Jeremy.
Ron Jeremy, yes. I met Ron Jeremy initially because I was doing a movie in Australia called Trailer Passion. The film is coming up.
Oh yeah, and that's a beautiful movie. I saw you've got this beautiful blonde girl in a strip club.
Yes. The movie was actually produced with a very good friend of mine named Susanna Harshmid, who was also later on in a movie of mine called Defenseless. And we had some mutual friends, and Susanna and I decided that we would make two movies, sort of working with a distributor here, and they would be erotic thrillers. And the first one that we did together was called Fishnet, and the second one was called Trailer Passion. They were made for very low budget. However, they were shot on film. They were Super 16, and everyone was paid. However, they were actually made for under $100,000 each, and so very short shooting schedules, like to say 10 to 12 days. And so we did Fishnet first, and then which Suzanne was one of the stars, and then I also got other actors who'd been in some other movies of mine, in Sense of New Age Killer, Kevin and Helen Hopkins, and got them in the movie too, which was great. And I was very also impressed with the fact that these actors who had done other types of movies, all types of movies, were quite happy to come in this movie and actually do some fairly explicit sex scenes, but at the same time didn't look at the film like it was just some porno movie, which it wasn't a porno movie. It's not a hardcore movie. I mean, it's basically sort of like a thriller that's kind of got sex scenes, and sex scenes are probably not that much more explicit than what you'd see these days on HBO or Showtime, or even, say, Sex and the City. But the Trailer Passion, which was the second one, I just remembered hearing that they had a exhibition on in Melbourne called Sexpo, and Ron Jeremy was going to be there. And I remember actually thinking to myself, I was working with a writer, a guy called John Arden, who's also a good friend of mine, and I heard that Ron Jeremy was in town, and I thought, oh, gee, it'd really be good to get him in Trailer Passion, but not in a sex scene, actually give him a role as a corrupt cop. And because I kind of figured, I'd read interviews with Ron where he's always saying that, I actually have a legitimate acting background, but no one ever really wants to use me for that. They want to use me for, to do sex scenes and stuff like that. And Ron had done so many movies. And I was already aware of him, of course. I mean, who isn't? I mean, Ron's very high profile, and he also does a fantastic job of marketing himself. So with Ron, I actually thought, I'm going to go to Sexpo and I'm going to ask him if he wants to be in this movie. So this is essentially what happened. I went down to Sexpo, not Expo. I went down to Sexpo. It's a very successful sort of sexual lifestyle exhibition, sexual lifestyle show that's on every year. And I went down there and I found him where he was in the booth, and I basically just went over to him and said, would you be interested in being in a movie? And I can't pay you a lot, but you will be paid. And he sort of said, what kind of movie? And because I think he, of course, thought I was just going to say a porno movie. He probably thought, what are some Australian porno movie? You're just going to throw in a few kangaroos and koalas and Australian porno movie. But no, I said to him, no, it's actually, so it's like an erotic thriller. I said, but I actually don't want you to do any sex scenes. But I said, you play a corrupt cop. And he really perked up. I could see straight in his expression. He liked the fact I was asking him to do this kind of role. So anyway, so what we did is that quickly I called John. I said, John, Ron wants to be in the movie. Let's slightly rewrite the role of the cop to suit Ron and expand it out a little bit. So that's basically how Ron got in the movie. So basically the next day, I decided that just to make sure that Ron is he's well taken care of and all that. So I went and picked him up myself in my car, and so on the way to the set I drove him. And I must admit it was kind of strange, just kind of like looking in my mirror and going, Ron Jeremy is sitting in the back of my car. It was kind of odd, Anyway, so Ron was absolutely fantastic, and I mean, his scene didn't take that long to shoot. It was like about 3 or 4 hours. We shot under a bridge down by a river in Melbourne, and he did a scene with another actor called Frank Bren, another very good Australian actor, and Ron was fantastic. His line reading was excellent, and he took direction really well. Well, obviously, he's really is an utter professional, and it is a shame, I think, that Ron doesn't get more legitimate film roles, because he's actually a very good actor, and in the film, quite a few people who saw the movie, of course, went, gee, Ron Jeremy was actually really good in that. And I'm kind of like, well, yeah. I mean, because even in some of Ron's earlier X-rated movies, say like films like Fascination, he actually did play real people. He actually had some of the stuff in his early porn films, I mean, back in the 70s, a lot of the porn films did have real stories, but they also had sex scenes in whereas now it's a lot less story oriented. It's more oriented just towards more explicit stuff. But back then he actually did play roles, and I could just see in the early movies that Ron Jeremy wasn't just some porno actor trying to be an actor. He was more like an actor who's doing some porn.
Oh, okay. So that was in Trail of Passion?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, well, we'll have to look that up. How interesting. Okay, now tell us about the Savage Cinema.
You mean
the set that came out?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well,
how did that happen?
Okay, I got in contact with, at some point, I sort of hooked up with a guy called Norm Hill, who ran a distribution company. He was originally with Anchor Bay, which is a very well-known company. Yeah. I mean, they've changed now. They've obviously got new ownership, but Norm was one of the first people to start up Anchor Bay, working with... working with a number of people who are probably like unknown to most people. But anyway, I had been contacted by Norm Hill through the internet, and he was releasing an Australian cop thriller TV movie called Blue Murder. And he'd heard that I'd written about it on various blogs and on some websites, and he wanted to know whether I'd be interested in doing some extras, shooting some extras, and doing commentaries and stuff for Blue Murder because they were releasing it in the States. So that was how I first got in touch with Norm Hill. Anyway, so what happened? I mean, I don't really know how much he knew about me, but anyway, I did the Blue Murder job for him. So basically, working with a guy who I've often done a lot of shooting with, David Richardson, we shot the Blue Murder interviews, and I was also on the commentary track talking with the director about it. But at the time, Norm then also said to me, I've just actually looked you up and I've noticed you've actually done like a lot of movies. And then he said to me, how many of these are actually released in the US? And then I told him, well, these ones are and these ones aren't. Mm-hmm. And then he said to me, can you send them to me? Anyway, so I sent him PAL DVDs of the movies, and left it with him for like a month or so. And then he actually got back to me fairly quickly after he'd watched them and said to me, I've just watched all your movies. I really like them, and would you be interested in perhaps striking some deal here that we release the movies in the States? And I said, yeah. And then so that's really how it happened. So eventually, rather than release the films kind of like individually, he decided that he was going to, release it as a box set. So yeah, he the box set was called Savage Cinema from Down Under, and they did it.
What year was this?
It's about 2004.
Okay, and there's tons of publicity regarding the release of that.
Yeah, it was great. So they came out through a company called Subversive. And that was Norm and a number of other people who were really, really dedicated to doing it right. That's what I liked about working with Norm. Norm himself is a massive cinephile also. So he's got he also has a mountainous knowledge of films. And so he and I got along very, very well. And so I also worked on the extras with them and worked on the commentaries, and also then worked with their editor, the guy who was doing all the grading, a guy called Eric Gersh. And then they put it all together and released it. And they also, because of Norm was also very well connected, they was able to be very broadly reviewed. So I think it's not 2004. I think it's like 2006. I think that was when it was. Anyway, it got really well reviewed, and it was great. So it sort of like helped, I guess, to some extent, me to build a little bit of profile in the US.
Yeah. What is your favorite of the movies you've made?
It's very difficult for me to talk about what my favourite movie is. I mean, at the moment, I guess in a way, probably Sensitive New Age Killer is probably the film where I was able to pretty much kind of like achieve what I set out to achieve, in the sense that, we had a reasonable budget, which was of course good, but at the same time, there's still aspects of it which I'm sort of look at, and of course I'd sort of go, I'd change this, I'd change that. I don't really want to get into too much, in my own filmmaking, going back and constantly rewriting and changing and bringing out different versions, which I don't really do. But then also Defenseless, which in a way was a more experimental film in the sense that it was like, it's all, no dialogue. It's almost like, in a sense, it's like more like pantomime, like the lead actress, Susanna Harshmit, doesn't say one word of dialogue in the movie. And it's not that, for example, like when she should be speaking, she just isn't speaking. It's just that the story's deliberately created in such a way that she doesn't need to speak, because she becomes kind of like this avenging angel after she's something terrible happens to her. But it's all kind of like done almost kind of like a, in a way, more like an opera, which is in a sense that it's kind of music, and it's more like it's just music and visuals. With that one, again, very long shoot, but a small crew, and I guess with each movie, I'm always, every time I do one, I kind of feel I've got something out of my system, because I think probably what fuels every movie I do is like some sense of outrage about something. I think everything I do is fueled by outrage, and also fueled by that kind of like the duality of us as humans. So everything I've done is definitely about, there's one side of you that's struggling to be good, while the bad side's struggling to be bad. You know what I mean? Like, to me, that's what really interests me in terms of characters. I'm very interested in the duality, and it's every human being. You constantly have that conflict inside you. There's what society wants you to do. There's also your own nature, and that's what's most interesting to me. In movies, in stories, in any kind of drama, is, do we be true to our natures? Because sometimes also by being true to your nature, you can actually hurt people if you're being true to your nature. So to me, that's really interesting, finding that sort of that level in your life where, especially because in your life you have family, you have friends, you have you have partners, you have wives and husbands. That to sort of say, well, I'm just going to be true to my nature. Well, often that excludes other people or ends up hurting other people. So nearly everything that I've done, I would say everything I've done is very much about that. Like I just did a film in New Zealand called Fertile, and that's also about a man struggling with himself on an island. We shot it on a completely deserted island, and off the coast of New Zealand. And on that one, again, it's about this man who's having terrible struggles with himself, with his inner demons. And then the other one I just did is I've got 2 in post at the moment, which is called Pond Scum. That's about a woman who's like, she's a mother, but there's a side of her that basically wants to kind of rebel against being a mother and sort of also, again, embrace her true nature. But her true nature is virtually homicidal. So to me, that's what really that's really what interests me. So in a way, the movies that I like of my own are the ones where I feel like that's really been manifested. I mean, another one I did was also The Masturbating Gunman, which is also called, the US title is Master Avenger versus Ultra Villain, The Lair of the Naked Bikini, which was a title that was actually, like I'll never quite understand. The distributor thought that The Masturbating Gunman was a bit, not a great title. So let's call it Master Avenger versus Ultra Villain in The Lair of the Naked Bikini. It's kind of like... So anyway, again, The Masturbating Gunman's about the same thing. It's about this guy who wants to basically be good person, but he's incredibly distracted by women. So it's how if he doesn't masturbate, he will have to follow his absolute most worst primal urges. So it's kind of like about that. So he's an assassin who, you've really got to see the movie to understand it. But it's a black comedy. But again, it still explores that same theme of that kind of that duality of that good and bad, wanting to be good, wanting to be bad, which is also then of course explored in Circus of Dread. That's really what that's about.
Well, now with Circus of Dread, you have. As your stars, you have Domiziano Arcangeli and Bill Oberst Jr. and Vida Ghaffari. And they're all great friends of mine. It's going to be a great film because you're the director and writer and producer and everything else, right?
Yeah, well, the film is, it was obviously from a script that, I wrote initially probably about 2 years ago. And then I rewrote it after I actually met one of the producers on the film, was a guy called Matt Chazen. And Matt read the script. Like I told him I've got this idea, and I initially told he said, all right, well I'd be happy to read it. And then Matt read it, and Matt got back to me very quickly, which was so impressed with, because often people, you give them a script, you don't hear from them for like months, but I heard from Matt very, very quickly. And Matt had already said that he knew a couple of people who think would be actually very good for the script. So I actually was aware already while I was writing it of Domi and also of Bill. And so it got to a point where I remember even at one point I went to a signing at a bookshop in Burbank, Dark Delicacies, and I did actually meet Bill at that time. And Bill actually just introduced himself, but that time the script wasn't quite ready, and so that's why I didn't talk to him that much about it, because in a way I didn't want to talk about a project that, for example, Bill could end up reading and not even liking, you know what I mean? So I just said, no, it's really nice to meet you, and it's great to meet Bill, but I said, just give me about 3 or 4 weeks. I just got to do some fine tuning on the script, and then of course I finished the script, and then the scripts went to both Domi and Bill, and via Matt, and then again, I heard back fairly quickly from both Domi and Bill, and it was really, really positive, which was fantastic. Because I think both of them are just incredible actors, and I mean they totally embody their characters. You know what I mean? It's not like just it's not like you're just watching them play a role. They just become the role, and they embrace it. And also, both of them just have this incredible sensibility of totally immersing themselves in it to the point where you don't even know where the film stops and reality starts. And I like that type of approach, because that's my approach to making movies. Like, even the one I just did on the island, the approach was, yes, we're on the island. That's all we do while we're on the island. We're not going to be spending time answering emails. We're not going to be spending time doing anything else but just making the movie. And I'll often shoot in very harsh conditions, and I'll often shoot with people that I really just want to make movies with people who have like an attitude, basically, make the movie or die, that type of attitude. Because, to me, I feel that, you don't have long to live So you've got to spend your life doing something you're passionate about, because, life's really short. So, why not at least spend it doing something with sincerity, with absolute passion? And if you end up killing yourself while you're doing it, well, fine. At least you didn't die, basically, sitting at a desk writing out receipts or something like that. You actually did something. And as soon as I met Domi and Bill, I saw that in them. So I kind of thought it was like kindred spirits. And it was the same with Matt. All these people were sort of like, it wasn't this sort of form. See, I'm often, when you're making films, you're dealing with people who are very formal and very sort of like, oh yes, the script's all right, we'll see how it goes. I mean, that's sort of, it's almost as if somehow like being passionate about it is somehow seen as being like a negative. But to me, both the guys really liked the script and liked the characters, and then I had said to them, I thought that Bill would be best for this character and Domi best for this character. And initially Matt disagreed, because Matt actually thought that they'd be better for the opposite characters. That Bill would be better for the other. But and obviously, there's not necessarily a wrong or right about this, because obviously the way that they've been cast, and the movie isn't made yet, but the way it's been cast, it's not necessarily saying that had Domi taken on the other role, he wouldn't have also done that well. It was more just me personally thought that Domi would embody it in the way that I wanted it to be seen, and the same with Bill. Because Bill's playing a character who he's a fairly bad guy, but he's a bad guy at the same time. He's also scrupulously honest. So, but at the same time, if someone's dishonest with him, he'll blow their head off.
Okay.
He's that kind of person, and so it's about this, scrupulously honest, and obviously robbing banks isn't being honest, but his sensibilities is very honest, and it's really how he basically discovers that someone has betrayed him while he's on the lam after a robbery, and he heads towards this town where his brother lives, because he hopes to hide out with his brother.
Okay.
And his brother is a priest, and he doesn't have a church, he has a big bus. And he holds confessions in the bus. And he's a travelling priest, so he travels from town to town for towns that don't have confessionals, and he's like the travelling, he's like the travelling priest who takes the travelling confessor. But what happens is that what Bill's character's not thinking about, of course, is that he thinks, I'm going to hide out with this guy. Well, he's going to hide out, and he's also going to leave the money with this guy. So, of course, Domi ends up being the one who ends up being grabbed by the cops. But he ends up going to becoming part of an underground circus, because the thing I haven't revealed is that the priest, one of the reasons he became a priest, and especially when you're spending a lot of time in confessionals and you're often robed up, is that he himself, Domi, is a deformed character. He's deformed. He has facial deformity. So he goes into a circus. It becomes like a circus act, this underground circus. And Bill, only at this point does Bill finally realise that how destructive he's been to his brother. So Bill goes under the knife to become a freak to get into the circus. That's how Bill penetrates a circus. So the question then becomes, will Bill be able to rescue his brother, save his brother's life? So that's really the main dramatic question in the movie, that Bill's ultimate sacrifice is he wants to save his brother's life. So the circus is very much the background of the movie, but it's very much about two brothers that, and one brother's love for the other brother, but also how their relationship is compromised because they've got very different goals.
Okay.
And it's not, so it's very much, influenced to me, obviously, being a tale of like a tale of two brothers, but, the background of it is like, obviously, films like Freaks, and Santa Sangre and The Unholy Three, a lot of the kind of Todd Browning movies. But more than anything, it's about people who struggle with their natures. And this is what Bill's character and Domi's character both have massive struggles with their own natures. Like Domi's struggling also with, there's a woman who is very attracted to him, and she wants him to have her baby. So he's a priest struggling with that. Bill's struggling.
And is that Vida?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's Vida Ghaffari. She plays that character. And then Bill's struggling with the fact that that his true nature is really to sort of bulldoze his way through life, basically, killing and cheating people. But at the same time, he then has this other side of himself that he actually wants to be a good, honest guy. So it's people in conflict with each other. So to me, that conflict is pretty much informing all the drama in the movie. But the circus is, a background, and of course I'm not going to really give away too much about the circus, and because there's a lot of secrets about the circus and how the circus came to be, and that's all revealed in the movie.
Oh, okay. Well, Guy, I want to know all that. But
You have to see the movie.
Okay. Okay. Well, actually, now I can see why you picked Domi for that character then, because he is very well. Both Bill and Domi are sensitive, but to be the priest.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I think that Domi's a very, very, very sensitive guy, and also and Domi's also very much coming from, to me, his filmmaking and his life is informed basically by that desire to be artistic, that artistic,
Yes.
He's coming from the art. He's coming from that thing about totally understanding that that art is something that you sort of can live or die by, and it defines you as a person. But then Bill, I see that other side of Bill, because the thing is with Bill, Bill has played a lot of characters, a lot of evil characters,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I also see an incredible sensitivity and depth of emotion in Bill. That's really what I saw so that's why I thought to myself that Domi will play the priest because he has that connection with the priest, but also Domi also has Domi also has his presence is very 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 electric. He has a great deal of charisma. But to me, Bill has almost got this other side of him. It's like an onion that you just peel back the layers in Bill, and that's why I also have, even though to me. The character that Bill's playing in this, I don't think I'd say I can see a parallel character in what he's played before, to that extent.
Yeah.
But I think in a way that's probably also what's attracted Bill, and also Bill and I both have that love of freaks and being different, and we've had great conversations, about our love, of course, Todd Browning and movies like Freaks, but also we both have a fascination about people who are deformed and people who are different, and trying to live with being different, and how do you do that? So the film is very much about outsiders, about how do outsiders live their life, how do outsiders basically, fit into the fabric of the world these days, which is actually very it's trying to make everybody very regimented.
But I think Circus of Dread is definitely going to be a success with a fantastic director and writer and producer and everything else. And with stars like Bill Oberst Jr. and Domiziano Arcangeli. So thank you so much for this interview, Mark. I knew that you would be great.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I'll see you all at the theatre for Circus of Dread.
Yes. Okay. Or on the set. Okay.
On the set first.
Okay.
Everything in my life is about you. Everything. From the moment I get up in the morning to the end of the day. It's you. I want this. I need that. Could you do this for me? It never fucking ends. I used to have a life. It was awesome. Now this is my life. This is it. You're it. That's what I got. That's what I got. Lucky me. I kick myself every day. I rue the day that you came into my life. I hate you. You have no idea how much I hate you. I can't do this anymore. I've still got time left. I can still do something with my life. I don't remember the last time I had time to read a fucking book, get my nails done, take care of myself. It's all about you. You're fucking ruining my life. The best years of my fucking life. And you've got nothing to say. You've never got anything to say. You just stand there with your fucking mouth hanging open. I want to put my fucking fist through it. Are you fucking crying? Stop fucking crying again or I'll fucking slap you into next week.